Welcome
Hey.
back to Morbid Movies podcast with Mary and Dom. I need to clear my throat. Professional. Well, what are we covering today, Mary? It's more snow, and some
More
glitter.
snow.
Glitter.
Always snow. Today we are talking about the 1985 film Legend, directed by the great Ridley Scott. And that one stars Tom Cruise, Mia Sara, Tim Curry, David Bennett, Billy Barty is in it, who I'm always happy to see. And it's an interesting one.
It is. Robert Picardo is Meg Mucklebones as well, which was a really, really
Yeah, he
excellent.
looked familiar to me when I was looking at the IMDb, but I'm not I don't know why
Voyager.
because so was
Voyager.
it?
Star Trek Voyager.
Oh, is that okay? I'm not like the biggest Trekkie, so I'm sporadically seen it, so that's why I know him. Okay. Because I included him in our list because I was like, I know him, but I don't know
Well,
why.
it was like the best bit of the film. I mean, the makeup was incredible. Anyway,
Oh yeah.
anyway, anyway, I'll save my general hatred. Again, Ridley Scott, incredible director. This film leaves a little bit to be desired from my
It-
side of things. Maybe it's because I saw the European cut and there's like 60 million other cuts of this film, including two better ones, including the theatrical one and the one you guys got in the States. But yeah, we'll get into it. We'll get into it. We still don't have an intro, but we'll get into it. What did you love about this movie, Mary? Why did you bring this to Morbid Movies with
yeah.
Mary and Dom?
Well, I grew up with this one. This, was we had the theatrical US cut on VHS when I was a kid. So this is just one of those films that I was, um, introduced to at an impressionable young age, which is probably why I'm more able to ignore a lot of the storyline flaws in it. But I mainly love this film for two reasons. One is the visual effects and, just general atmosphere that Ridley Scott's really known to bring to all of his films. And the other thing is just Tim Curry. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely.
really makes up for a lot of the flaws of this film.
Indeed, and I think if I was going to encourage anybody to watch any cut of this, it would be the director's cut, which has some alternative endings to the one we have in Europe. It's currently streaming for free on, well, not for free. If you have Disney Plus in the UK, which obviously you pay a monthly fee for, you can watch the European cut of it. Yeah, the ending that you guys got and the director's cut ending seems a little bit more complex, a little bit more thoughtful. The one the European audience got was just like romantic bollocks, and
Yeah.
it's all a bit over the top. I mean, the whole thing. I mean, look, man, right? Tom Cruise. All right, yeah, Tom Cruise is an industry upon himself, but I find it really hard to pull for a guy that's like, oh, you've thrown a ring over the cliff. Oh, I have to compete for your love now. I'm gonna dive over this cliff into the water and nearly kill myself because your love demands it so. If somebody threw a ring over a cliff, I'd be like, see you later, love. Off you pop. Doesn't matter how beautiful they are and how lovely they are and how enchanting they are and how mystical and how fairy-like. If you throw a ring over a cliff, I'm not going to get it. Like, what are you doing, Tom Cruise? I appreciate you now a multimillionaire, but you weren't at this point. You know, you've really worked on your smile as well since this film. But the point is, do not, and this is a message to our audience, don't jump over a cliff, off a cliff, anywhere. Don't go anywhere near a cliff for a girl who throws a ring or anybody who throws a ring and says, "Go get it, go fetch it." It's a competition for my suitors. Who does that? Crazy people do that, Mary.
Princess Lili does that apparently.
Princess,
You are a grade A hater today.
I am. This film sucks. Like,
I am just going to keep bringing my childhood slop in front of you so you can tear it down.
look, I love you. I really love you, Mary. We've known each other for a long time. You've got some good taste. And I love Ridley Scott. And, Tom Cruise has come a long way. Ridley Scott has also come a long way. Of course, there's a lovely story to come from this. Mia Sara was practically gifted her career with this role. So there are lovely things from this. But just some odd, just some odd bits. Some odd bits. And I was like, this is a little bit too cheesy, a little bit too cliche, but the
It's
makeup, and there's a fantastic and also kind of gory uh, story about Tim Curry and the makeup, which I'm going to get you to tell, which was fantastic in your research. The makeup was incredible. Like I say, one of my favorite moments was Meg Mucklebones. I really wanted her to eat, or the character, them, to eat Tom Cruise, to eat Jack. I was like, eat him! Eat him!
just swallow him and end the movie. That's what you were hoping for.
With the ridiculous dialogue, and they're all looking at each other, they're all like, they're all doing all this, and I'm like, what are you doing with your face? What's going on with you? Well, this is Jack and Lily. They're all looking at, they're looking here and they're looking there, and they've got their mouths half open, and it's all. I'm like, what are you even doing? That's not romance. Like, are you on drugs? Like, is Tom Cruise on drugs in this film? You know,
Mhm.
is Lily on drugs? Is Lily the one? She chucks the ring. Is she persuading Tom Cruise to be on drugs in this film? Is she propositioning Tom Cruise? Is this a great manipulation by Princess Lily, who nearly turns evil at the end of it? Maybe Princess Lily's the real villain in this whole film. Did you ever think about that? And we're just all being manipulated. Tim Curry, the devil, the darkness, manipulated. And he was manipulated by Lily. Anyway, I've gone off on one, but yeah, what's all this about? What's all this like weird looking to one side and looking up and down that Tom Cruise does? Like he looks like he's high most of the time. Anyway, Mary,
There is an
listen,
odd reliance on close-ups in this film that don't fully make sense.
thank
Uh,
you,
to
thank
be
you.
fair to this film, it was a very troubled production because partway through filming they had to pause because their set burned down, and then they were forced to pause again because Tom Cruise's father passed away, which might also be why some of his performance is a little bit strained. Now you feel like a bad person, don't you? Fucking get you.
Oh,
Um,
no.
So, I
I
mean, and
know.
I think that's why you see such a weird drop. Like, they sort of just drop the goblin characters halfway through the film, is I really think that there was a lot of strain on time and money. And there's also, this film had a lot of studio interference, especially the theatrical cut for the US. They wanted to turn it into a fantasy film for children. And it got a PG rating, which it really shouldn't have, because it's very much started as a dark fantasy that was meant for adults. So it's just this problem is this film had a lot of trouble and it couldn't settle on what it wanted to be by the end, which I think
Yeah.
is reflected in the fact that there are so many different cuts of the film with
Yeah.
different soundtracks even floating around.
Yeah, and I want you to talk about that. There's two real things that I want you to focus on, because your research was fantastic with this film. The first is the Tim Curry makeup story, but also the
Yeah.
soundtracks because I think they're fantastic. But I
Mhm.
just want to say, for clarification, now I feel like an absolute dick. Uh,
Well,
I
now you
mean,
know. But I mean, even still, the script also went through like 15 revisions I read. So I honestly just think there was a certain point where maybe they should have said if it's revised this many times and we're having trouble, maybe we need to rethink how the story works because there's definite problems. It doesn't feel like a complete story
no,
in
no.
any way, but as I said, I have that childhood Stockholm syndrome for it, but also just can't throw it away because I'm such a big fan of the visual effects in this film and
Yeah,
like I can appreciate the vision of what they were trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? In that reflection, yes, I can appreciate the vision of what they're trying to do. And again, at Morbid Movies, we're big fans of glitter, we're big fans of snow, and there's plenty of that in this film. There is a reason for this to be brought to this podcast and this channel, and I appreciate seeing it. I'm glad I've seen it. I won't watch it again, but I'm particularly sad now that now that I know these challenges were made, and particularly because I didn't research, which shows the work that you've put in here. I didn't know that it wasn't meant to be a childish film, for kids. And some of your research kind of rings even more true because I remember reading that there's a lot of influence, but of the book Paradise Lost by John Milton, of course, which looks at Satan's perspective, and that would have been lovely to explore, and even the director's cut ending, which still has darkness there, still has, even at the end, I would have loved to have seen that. I would have brought more dynamics to it. But what we got, and what it sounds like a lot of people got, was this kind of half finished, kind of half childish, half romantic kind of mush, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
That's how I feel about it. And obviously, if anybody wants to hate my guts, if anybody wants to argue, that's what we do this for. So please do put your comments down below. But yeah, it's sad to know that it could have been so much more,
Mhm.
especially talking to you here.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that's reflected in its obviously like by this time Ridley Scott had already made Blade Runner, which is a great film with wonderful atmosphere. So, he had the skill and the vision at that point. I think so much of this can be chalked up to bad luck, a difficult script, and just a lot of post-production second guessing. There's so many different cuts. They change so many things because they second guess themselves after focus groups, and I think that it suffers from that lack of confidence that came from those stumbling blocks and changes. Like to get into that Tim Curry makeup before we keep
Mm,
missing it, because it is relevant to this. Like he had that, giant bullhorn structure on his head and a lot of prosthetics. And one of the problems with that was not just the time it takes to put it on, but the time to take it off. And Tim Curry became impatient at one point and tried to just rip it off and ended up tearing his skin and hurting himself. And because I know it just, oh, poor guy. And like Ridley Scott felt horrible about that and tried to find ways to film around him more, which I think is why most of his presence is really in the last 20 minutes or so of the film is they really tried to keep him out of that makeup
mm.
for his own comfort. It's most of the cast of the film, with the exception of Tom Cruise and uh, Mia Sara, had to spend hours getting into and out of makeup every day, which is difficult as well. And I mean, I think it's worth it for just what they achieved with the visual
Uh,
effects. Because as far as the 80s fantasy boom goes, there's a lot of 80s fantasy movies, and most of them have kind of terrible stories, if I'm being honest. But in terms of visual effects, I think this one, based on the visual effects, is one of the peak ones vision wise. I have to admit, wonder, because every single scene in that film, there's something in the atmosphere. There's snow, there's glitter, there's like fluff floating around in the forest. What was everyone's respiratory situation
mm.
like by the end of that film? I assume that Tom Cruise is still coughing up glitter from
I'm
that set 40 years ago.
I imagine so. As he bathes in his millions of dollars, I imagine he is coughing up lots of glitter. Yes. I wonder if people in the 80s look back at this film and go, I wonder if, people knew that Tom Cruise was going to be such a big star. Because you mentioned in your research, Johnny Depp, you can
Mhm.
understand Robert Downey Jr., perhaps you can understand Jim Carrey was also
That
considered for the
one
role
is the
as
one
well.
that well, it's like Jim Carrey
I
feels
love Jim
weird to
Carrey.
me.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that's not a Jim Carrey part. I mean, and I've seen him do more serious roles, and he's a competent actor, but especially like a late 80s or mid to late 80s Jim Carrey, I just can't visualize him. I can't even, if I'm being honest, Robert Downey Jr. doesn't feel right for that part because I feel like he brings a certain sarcasm to
Yeah.
roles that wouldn't have worked. Because I think, you needed somebody who could play a more earnest character, which I think Tom Cruise is able to do, but flaws of how this film was cut and scripted aside, he's certainly capable of that. But I definitely I don't regret that aspect of the casting. But yeah, Jim Carrey just caught me by surprise because it just doesn't seem like that was even he at that point in time, I feel like was pretty well typecast as a comedy guy still.
Yeah. But this is the most Jim Carrey Tom Cruise has ever looked. I just want to say that this is the most like Jim Carrey Tom Cruise has ever looked in this film. So
This
I just,
this is actually the longest his hair was ever on film because he just hadn't cut it in so long. It's never been that long
there you
on
go.
film again. So, what useless fact you can all take to the grave with you. But
Indeed, that is also what we're here for on Morbid Movies.
hmm
The soundtrack is also an interesting, as we're both fans of music, Mary.
hmm
Soundtrack facts are almost so interesting as well. Two different soundtracks for this
Yeah.
film.
Yeah, the European and the director's cut both use the original soundtrack that was composed by Jerry Goldsmith, excuse me, which is a more standard classical fantasy soundtrack like one would expect from a film, and that was the version you saw. So that the American theatrical cut that I grew up with, the studio decided to hire Tangerine Dream to create the soundtrack, and I believe they're German. They're like a electronic music group. My mom had a couple CDs, but I'm not super familiar with their career overall, if I'm being completely honest. But it was interesting for me the first time as an adult, I got a hold of the movie and it happened and I was like, oh, director's cut, cool. And I put it on and it wasn't the soundtrack I was used to. I found that really disorienting personally, just because I had that familiarity with that soundtrack. Did you get a chance to hear any of the Tangerine Dream? I did send you a link, I think.
Yeah, it is the German electronic production. Kind of. I mean, I'd heard the name before, and I hadn't associated them. I certainly wouldn't have associated them before your research with this soundtrack. But I think that it is interesting. It's an interesting choice. I mean, from my perspective, and this is one of the big questions I wanted to ask you, kind of towards the end, but I'll ask it now. From a soundtrack perspective, obviously things changed. Going back to it now, having a fresh pair of eyes on it, you're not a child anymore. Time has passed. Different soundtrack, different endings, and all that considered. Yeah, how do you look back on this? Is it the romantic, lovely film that child Mary, you know, enjoyed, soundtrack Watts and everything, or soundtrack Watts and all? Was it, is it still what you built it up to be?
I think that the thing was that really is that a lot of the things that I was there for as a kid are still the things that I'm there for now, because I was really there for like Tim Curry, or like my favorite scene in that film is the dress waltz scene where the dance happens and then at the end he steps through the mirror, which honestly I feel like as a special effect from the mid 80s still holds up actually quite well.
Yep.
As far as it goes, like obviously, with CGI we'd probably do better now, but for at that time that was really cutting edge. And it's just it's hard for me too, because like so much of that association is associated with that very kind of odd atmospheric soundtrack from Tangerine Dream, so it's a little bit weirder to watch it with the soundtrack that the rest of the world got as the result of that, because I think it changes the feel of a lot of the scenes when you change the music too.
Mm.
And it makes me curious, if I don't think you would like it, but I wonder if you'd feel differently about some of it if you heard it with the other soundtrack, how that would compare for you. Because listening to it as a standalone without seeing it with the film is a different experience, and you notice the age of the music more outside of the
Yeah,
film.
yeah. Well, I think that's definitely when I come back over and see you guys. We'll make a night of it. We'll have a movie night and we'll rewatch it. Okay. I
Yeah, it
pro
sounds
I,
good. It's not a long one, at least. Is the theatrical cut's only like an hour and 20
Yeah,
something,
I
so.
promise I will give it. I just said I probably wouldn't watch it again, but if that happens, I will watch it again. Emma was watching it with me, and hopefully you'll meet Emma when I come over. But she made a good point actually, which goes back to the rating element of it. In 1985, the way sort of Princess Lili was dressed, particularly in that conversation with darkness,
Hmm.
very risque for the time, and I hadn't thought about that. And I was like, yeah, actually, 1985. This would have been obviously,
Well, it's
goth Mia Sarah is all good by me, of course.
mhm. It's
But
a wildly low cut dress.
yeah, but Mary, but like I say, Emma was saying that it's not really, for that time, very risque, and also, like you say, PG rating. I mean, I know that sounds silly
Hmm.
because you get all kinds of stuff now with a PG rating, but certainly at this time, you could tell after you mentioned it during this podcast. I've started to think back to it. It's like, yeah, you can tell that it wasn't originally supposed to be that way.
There is, especially towards the beginning when you really see in the scenes in the kitchen where you see the cook just like,
Mm.
pounding on that guy on the table and stuff. It's like, I think that is really one of the bigger indicators, but there is sort of this like seething undercurrent of implied violence and gore through this film that's never fully realized, because they were trying to thread that needle of making it somehow dark but family friendly. And I think it does suffer for that
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well, because I there was an iteration plan that was supposed to be significantly more violent and gory than what the end result ended up being.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like it at one point would have leaned significantly more towards horror.
Yeah, well, and then this, I suppose this is a good question for our audience. So if you are engaging
Mm.
in this, and however you are, whether it's listening to it or watching it with us, how this is a question for you, Mary, but also the audience. How would you have liked it to end? Like if I, based on your research and based on what what I could have seen in the director's cut, I would have loved more from Tim Curry's character. Obviously, that may have been very, very difficult, given that they had to
Hmm.
kind of work around him. But I would have loved more of his perspective going into this because obviously an incredible character, but obviously a lot more layers to that kind of relationship between good and evil, and I would have loved to have seen more of that explored. What would you have liked to have seen in an ideal world from this film?
I don't, my issues aren't so much with the ending, which is a standard expected, like, storybook ending in most iterations, give or take. But I feel like it's like the middle of the film needs to be fleshed out because it doesn't really feel like much of a quest because they ended up cutting so many elements from the story because it's, like when Tom Cruise goes and gets his like sword and shield and armor. He just walks in and takes it. He doesn't have to like solve a riddle three or, dodge a trap or fight anything to get it. He just walks into a cave and grabs this stuff and then ends up, um, it seems like almost immediately losing the sword and shield because outside of the interaction with Meg Mucklebones, he doesn't really actually use any of that stuff. So it's sort of like a why did he go get like he's still wearing the armor, but everything else sort of vanishes. So it just feels like there's a lot of elements of the story that just get dropped, or like Nell's character. You see her at the beginning and then sort of in the middle of the film, but then there's no resolution of is she still frozen? Is she back? Is everybody
Mm.
good? Yeah, so there's a lot of it's like it feels like the center of the film gets a little bit like a fever dream for a while because they're trying to cover so much so quickly that none of it actually makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's
And
very gone. Yeah.
yeah, so it is that it's just that there's things that need to be fleshed out. I definitely would have liked to have seen more of Tim Curry because, as usual, he is chewing up the scenery in every scene he's in, and it's especially amazing considering the amount of, latex he's under to be able to be that expressive with so much glued to your face is incredible because he really like the faces he pulls
Yeah, yeah,
are just
absolutely.
fantastic. And
Absolutely. Yeah. It's great. And I think, that speaks volumes. Like I say, Emma was watching the film with me, and, she's not necessarily a film buff in the most traditional sense. And she was like, wow, Tim Curry is incredible in this. And it just goes to show as well. I forget just what a big deal Tim Curry was in Hollywood at this time, and I forget,
just such a legend in
yeah,
general. And
yeah.
and this, and I think it's interesting too, is he was cast for this specifically on merit because Ridley Scott watched Rocky Horror Picture Show and said this is the guy. And it's funny because there are weird parallels in this film where it's, an innocent couple runs into Tim Curry who tries to, seduce one or both of them. Like there is some odd parallels to this as well between the two films, so I can understand the thought process in choosing him. Is honestly, if you want someone to be like evil and seductive, you can't really go wrong with Tim Curry at his peak powers.
No, no, you cannot. No, you cannot. And again, I think if you go and watch this film for any reason, it is Tim Curry's Darkness
Mm-hmm.
character. To wind up then, Mary, we'll do the favorite scene question. Mine is unquestionably Meg Mucklebones nearly,
Mm-hmm.
nearly eating Jack, and I wish that it had happened. I just think the character was very, very scary, very, very frightening, and
Oh,
for
absolutely.
1985,
Just
for
really
this.
fantastic makeup on
Mm,
Meg Mucklebones. One of the things that haunts me is during my research for this, I found out they'd considered casting Richard O'Brien
mm,
for that
mm.
role. And, obviously perfect as is, but I do kind of sit there and wonder what he would have brought to that role because Richard O'Brien, of course, is great at playing creepy characters too. But like that is definitely one of my favorite scenes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What is your favorite scene then, Mary?
Mine definitely my favorite scene is the one with the dress waltz. I just always liked the absolute creepy bizarreness of the scene. And what I will tell you, because I see you pulling a face, you need to watch it with the Tangerine Dream song because the song they use has a very creepy carnival vibe that I think works significantly better than the Goldsmith soundtrack does. And, anyone who wants to agree with me, that's completely valid because, as I've said, I'm terribly biased towards the version I grew up with,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
though I know it's a deeply flawed version as well. I just like the soundtrack and how it fits the vibe because it gives it a certain distinct 80s fantasy weirdo vibe that I enjoy.
Yes, yes, that is how I experience you, not as a well, yeah, kind of as a product of the 80s and a massive weirdo, but in the most loving way possible, of course. You
Yeah,
know,
that's apt.
yes, indeed, indeed, and I love you for it. Yeah, and I think because we like to wax philosophical, and I always say we're going to keep this to a tight X, Y, and Z minutes, but then it's nice to catch up with you. It's always nice to talk to you about these films. Does it do its job thematically? Because again, now I know what it could have been. I'm left even more disappointed by what I saw because to me, it's another mushy romance fairy tale story. But it could have been more about the battle between good and evil. You know, and by the other version, where there's two, they basically realize they're from two different worlds and they don't actually end up together. I think that's a fantastic ending where it doesn't all end up like, oh, everything's nice and everything's wonderful and let's run into the sunset with fairies and, all that knackers. So I think there could have been so much more, and I just don't think that it comes off as anything but a cheesy, almost childish
Yeah,
kind
I
of
think
fairy tale, that's kind of by numbers to me, with exception, of course, to Tim Curry's incredible
mm,
acting. But that's just my perspective because I don't have the love for it that you do. I didn't, it was the first time I watched
mhm.
it for this podcast. So do you think it does its job thematically?
I mean, objectively, from an adult perspective, I think it fails to do what it tried to do in terms of storytelling. I think it succeeded amazingly in terms of the visual
Hmm.
goals they set out for in creating atmosphere. But yeah, I think the storyline really does suffer from just not really fully committing to what they sort of set out to do. So I think that's definitely a valid criticism. And I think that that's something that, like I said, is suffered by most of the fantasy films that came out during that 80s fantasy boom. And I think the problem is that fantasy stories tend to be very large, and I don't think you can pack that into an hour and 30 minutes. And that's really what it suffers from. Is it's like when you think about the fantasy films that people really love, like Lord of the Rings, things like that, it's not 1 hour and 20-minute film. They were like, what, 3 hour films, and there were three of them. And then the extended versions take you like, half a week to watch, kind of a thing, because there's just so much content in there. So it's just, I feel like this is something where if they had decided to do this as, say, like a mini series with a good budget where they had the time, it could have
Yeah.
actually been something truly amazing. I just don't think you can do it in an hour and a half.
Yeah, I mean, there's other, again, you're absolutely right. And I mean, if it was a mini series, I would have liked to have seen like character arcs and little, things fleshed out for, Una, played by
Mhm.
Annabelle Lanyon, for example. I would have liked to have seen more. And that you could do that with a short series. You could do
Right.
that with an episodic television show where you can't do that with an hour and a half. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of missed opportunity here, Mary. I'm going to introduce a new feature because it's a sort of tried and tested way to sort of round up this kind of podcast when we talk about films. What rating would you give it now out of 10? Do you have like a star rating for this film now, and why would you give it that rating? I'm going to say mine is I'm going to give it a 5 because I think the aesthetics were incredible, but the storyline and the acting, with exception to Tim Curry, with exception to Annabelle Lanyon, and with exception to the very very brief cameo of the monster Mucklebones, I was not sold on this. And this isn't to criticize one of your childhood favorites. It's just me coming to it with fresh eyes. So I'm going to say 5 out of 10 for those reasons. Do you have a different grade, and why?
I think I probably wouldn't go too. I mean, I would probably say around like a 6-ish. So I'm not too far off from you. As I just, I give so much weight to the visual and the atmosphere of the film because I think that that's like really does make it stand out from films. But I definitely agree with you about the problems of the storylines. I'd say probably about a 5 or a 6 would be an appropriate out of 10 for this film, and that it really is. It's Tim Curry and the visual effects that even bump it that high. So
Yeah, yeah, I would say that. Fantastic. Guys, whoever is watching this, however you are watching it or consuming it, listening to it, we thank you. Of course, we appreciate you for spending your time with us today. If we've missed anything that you would like us to know about the film, that you'd like us to maybe cover in future episodes, we are happy to do that. So please do put that in the comments down below. Again, thank you for your support. Mary, what are we
mhm.
doing next? Because you are in charge. I did email you, full transparency to everybody watching this. I did email saying I'm picking the films in future, but no, it is Mary's vision, Morbid Movies. So Mary picks the films, and I have to lump it. No, it's a new experience for me most of the time. So
It's so tempting to just keep picking bad things and running you through the gauntlet, but I won't do that to you because I care about you. I
uh,
was,
give me,
I
give
was,
me, give me what inspires you. Give me the films that you want a spotlight that you think
so
deserve a
I
spotlight.
had a thought that for the next one, if we're gonna just kind of keep hovering in the 80s, I think we should do the classic vampire film, The Lost Boys, because I think you will enjoy that a little bit more. And I want to throw you a bone because you've had 2 months in a row of movies that you absolutely hated.
Well, I mean, yeah, but the thing is, I'd love to do the Lost Boys. I would love to do the Lost Boys, and if people want us to do that, we're going to take a few days, and from time of filming, we're going to figure the rest out. But if there's, the Lost Boys is a very loved and beloved goth film. A lot of
hmm
people talk about the Lost Boys. So go on.
just a like that's another childhood classic, but this time, we won't tear me down, so it'll be good.
No, no. Well, like I say, we'll debate. We'll debate
hmm
off camera about it. If you want to see the Lost Boys, either in the next episode or in the future, again, let us know. There is a lot of coverage out there, but we like to be obscure. And Mary, I just want to say publicly, you know what, I'm glad that you brought this to my attention. This is what this podcast is for. I'm learning stuff.
Now you
Uh,
know.
I'm connecting with you. I'm finding ways to connect with you on the other side of the world. So these are there are more than just a few reasons to do this podcast. So
Absolutely. I
yeah.
didn't, it's we can debate because I have a whole list of other films. I just would like to
Well, no, no,
probably break up the horrors for you a little
no. Well,
bit.
what would be, and I'm not challenging you. I'm not saying I don't want to do the Lost Boys because I really, really do. I love that film.
hmm Oh,
But
it's a great film.
do you have like get that just for the audience? What are a couple of other ideas?
Okay, well, if we're reading off of the list, we've got obviously the Lost Boys that I just mentioned. If we wanted to go with something, we haven't done any really old ones, so I had actually put on the list the old Vincent Price House on Haunted Hill, which is cheesy horror of the, I want to say it might have been 50s or either early 60s. I haven't done any research yet. So we could do something old if people want us to just cover like, the early roots of this kind of
Yeah,
stuff. Or, you know, I mean, obviously I'm open to other things that aren't even on my list at all, but as we have that, then, there's a lot of popular ones that we could do, because we haven't covered, Interview with the Vampire. We haven't done, like Pan's Labyrinth, or it's like I had Pride and Prejudice and Zombies on the list because I am just like think that
yeah.
film's silly as hell. But
I'm good. I'm good with silly. Well, let's see how a box office blockbuster does because we've done fairly niche films so far.
yeah.
So let's explore how much people want to see an emerging podcast such as ourselves cover such a tried and tested but exceptional film in The Lost Boys. Do some research. Let's see how it goes, and then we'll go back to because I'd love to cover some Vincent Price and
Hmm.
Pride and Prejudice and Zombies all sound great to me. So you keep feeding them to me, Mary, and I will try and find ways to enjoy them. Once
I will
again,
just keep feeding you slop as long as you'll take it.
yeah, well, there's some gold in there. Once again,
Mhm.
Tim Curry, who just one more thing. Didn't I read that his lifts were like taller than him for
Oh
the
yeah, they were, he's 5'9", and they had to put him in 18-inch frame lifts to make him stand at 7'3". And it just, this is something that I was talking about when we were watching this last night when I was reviewing it. I was like, they made him look so big in
Yeah,
that
the
movie. And
the
it,
the muscles and everything. I was like, wow.
yeah, because he's really only, a few inches taller than I am. And, just like so massive looking in that film. And I know Tom Cruise is not like the tallest man in all of Hollywood, which I think helps too, because if they try to put him next to somebody who is 6 feet tall, it just wouldn't have that impact. But they were very careful in their casting about the size relationship between actors,
Yeah, yeah.
much for that reason.
Yeah, I just think that's a really interesting fact to finish up on, just because that's what this has given me. I didn't know that Tim Curry
Can
even
you
had.
imagine how much your body would ache walking around on 18-inch lifts with that much horn glued to your head all day? Like, I can understand why he was trying to rip stuff off at the end
Yeah,
of the day. Like that
absolutely. This is the kind of
sacrifice for your art right there.
indeed, absolutely, as Tim Curry was known to do. But yeah, I imagine there's some weird fan fiction about Tim Curry dressed as the devil out there. It feels like
No,
it.
no doubt.
Yeah.
The internet goes to some strange places.
Yeah, it feels like this is the kind of film that would inspire that kind of
Oh,
that.
well, and he was absolutely ripped looking and all that makeup. So
Yeah, yeah.
there's an audience for that.
Talking about the horn, I guess give a lot of people the horn. Anyway, Mary, it's been a pleasure. We've been Morbid Movies. We'll be back with The Lost Boys, our most commercially accessible film for a while. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Is there anything? We don't have a fancy outro yet, do we? What do we say to people? Is the thing.
I we don't really have one. Just I don't know. Keep it spooky.
Keep it. I love it. Keep it spooky, everybody. See you later. Bye.
Bye.